Most people underestimate the power of the words they repeat to themselves each day. They believe their inner dialogue is simply a reaction to life, when in reality it is a powerful force that shapes how they see themselves and how they act. Every thought expressed in words sends a message to the mind about what is possible, what is expected, and what should be avoided. Over time, these repeated messages begin to define personal identity. A person does not wake up one day confident or defeated. They slowly become that way through the language they use internally. The mind works like a search system. When a person repeatedly tells themselves, "I'm not good enough," the mind begins collecting proof to support that statement. It notices failures more than progress, obstacles more than opportunities. On the other hand, when someone consistently tells themselves, "I can learn, I can improve, I can handle this," the mind starts looking for solutions instead of excuses. The circumstances may remain the same, but perception changes, and perception directly influences action. Self-talk also determines emotional responses. Two people can face the same challenge, yet respond completely differently because of what they tell themselves in that moment. One person says, "This is too hard," and immediately feels overwhelmed. Another says, "This will stretch me," and feels focused instead of fearful. The difference is not intelligence or luck, it is internal instruction. Emotions follow interpretation, and interpretation is guided by words. Over time, these internal conversations shape habits. A person who consistently speaks in discouraging terms is less likely to take risks, stay disciplined, or persist through difficulty. They may not consciously decide to quit, but their language hookup with their behavior quietly pushes them in that direction. In contrast, a person who speaks with responsibility and encouragement to themselves builds the habit of showing up even when motivation is low. This process explains why lasting change does not come from a single burst of inspiration. It comes from repeated mental reinforcement. What a person tells themselves every morning after every setback and during every decision becomes the blueprint for their actions. Identity is not fixed. It is constructed daily through internal dialogue. When individuals become aware of their self-talk and begin to choose their words intentionally, they take control of their personal development. Instead of allowing past experiences to define them, they use language to define who they are becoming. In the long run, the results a person experiences in life are rarely accidental. They are the outcome of beliefs formed through consistent self-talk, expressed through behavior, and reinforced over time. Most people wait for motivation before they take action, not realizing that motivation is unreliable and temporary. Feelings change from day to day, sometimes from hour to hour. If action depends on emotion, progress will always be inconsistent. This is where intentional language becomes powerful. The words a person chooses to speak to themselves can create discipline, even when motivation is absent. Discipline is not a personality trait. It is a practiced response guided by clear internal direction. Intentional language means speaking with purpose instead of reacting emotionally. When something goes wrong, the natural response is often frustration, self-blame, or discouragement. In those moments, careless self-talk weakens resolve. Statements like "I can't do this" or "I always mess up" may feel honest, but they offer no solution and no direction. Intentional language replaces emotional reactions with constructive instruction, such as "stay focused," "solve the problem," or "do the next right thing." These words calm the mind and guide behavior. The mind responds best to clarity. When self-talk is vague or negative, the mind hesitates. When it is clear and direct, the mind moves into action. Telling yourself "I'll try" leaves room for escape, while telling yourself "I'm committed" creates responsibility. The words used internally set the standard for behavior. Over time, those standards become habits. Intentional language also builds self-leadership. Just as a good leader gives clear direction to others, effective self-leadership requires giving clear direction to oneself. Instead of waiting to feel confident, a person can instruct themselves to act confidently. Instead of waiting to feel disciplined, they can speak discipline into existence through action-oriented language. The mind learns to follow instructions it hears repeatedly. This practice does not deny difficulty or pretend that challenges are easy. It acknowledges reality while refusing to surrender to it. Saying this is difficult, but I can handle it is not false optimism, it is practical guidance. It keeps emotions in check while allowing progress to continue. Emotional control begins with verbal control, and verbal control begins with awareness. As intentional language is repeated daily, discipline becomes less forced and more natural. Actions no longer depend on mood, they depend on standards. A person begins to do what needs to be done because they've trained their mind to respond to clear, purposeful commands over time. This discipline compounds, leading to greater consistency, stronger character, and measurable progress. Ultimately, intentional language transforms self-talk from an emotional reaction into a personal operating system. It becomes the inner voice that directs effort, strengthens resolve, and keeps a person moving forward long after motivation has faded. Expand the keynote 3. Don't add heading and speaker name up to 500 words. Lasting change rarely happens overnight because the human mind is built on patterns. Thoughts, reactions, and beliefs are formed through repetition, not single events. When a person has spent years speaking negatively or carelessly to themselves, those thought patterns become familiar and automatic. Expecting them to disappear in a moment of inspiration is unrealistic. This is why consistency over a focused period of time, such as 21 days, becomes so powerful. Repetition gives the mind new instructions and enough time to accept them as normal. When constructive self-talk is practiced daily, the mind begins to adapt. At first, the words may feel forced or unnatural. That discomfort is a sign that old patterns are being challenged. With continued repetition, the brain starts recognizing the new language as familiar. What once required effort gradually becomes the default response. This is how thinking patterns are rewired, not through intensity, but through consistency. The 21-day period serves as a training phase for the mind. Each day of intentional self-talk reinforces the same message. Improvement is possible, effort matters, and discipline is required. The mind learns through exposure. When it hears empowering language repeatedly, it begins to replace limiting beliefs with productive ones. Doubt slowly loses its grip, not because it disappears completely, but because it is no longer reinforced. Repetition also builds emotional stability. Negative self-talk often creates emotional spikes, anxiety, frustration, or hopelessness because the mind reacts to its own harsh language. Consistent, constructive self-talk steadies emotional responses. A person becomes less reactive and more focused. They still experience challenges, but those challenges no longer control their behavior. Emotional control improves because the internal dialogue is no longer chaotic. As days pass, behavior starts to align with the new thinking pattern. Small actions become easier, showing up on time, finishing tasks, staying focused, and following through on commitments. These changes may seem minor, but they signal a deeper shift. The mind is beginning to trust the new internal instructions. Confidence grows quietly through evidence created by consistent action. By the end of the 21 days, something important happens. The individual no longer needs to consciously correct every thought. The new self-talk begins to surface automatically during stress, fatigue, or uncertainty. This is the moment when change becomes sustainable. The mind has been trained to respond differently. Rewiring thinking patterns is not about perfection, it is about practice. Missed days can be corrected, and setbacks can be learned from. What matters is returning to the process. Consistent self-talk over time reshapes beliefs, strengthens resilience, and creates a mental environment where progress becomes the natural outcome rather than a constant struggle. Every action a person takes begins with a thought, and every thought is shaped by the words attached to it. When self-talk is careless, actions become inconsistent and unfocused. When self-talk is deliberate and constructive, actions gain clarity and direction. Over time, these actions accumulate, forming habits that either support growth or reinforce limitation. In this way, words are never isolated. They quietly influence behavior. And behavior steadily builds the course of a person's life. Small decisions repeated daily often appear insignificant in the moment. Choosing to stay disciplined for an extra hour, to remain calm during pressure, or to follow through when it would be easier to stop may seem minor. However, these actions compound. Each decision strengthens a pattern, and patterns eventually shape character. The quality of a person's self-talk determines the quality of these decisions because it provides the internal guidance that directs behavior. When individuals speak responsibly to themselves, they raise their personal standards. Instead of asking, how do I feel today? They begin asking, what is required of me? This shift moves life from emotional reaction to purposeful action. Consistent self-talk that emphasizes responsibility, effort, and focus encourages choices that align with long-term goals rather than short-term comfort. Over time, disciplined actions produce results, and results reinforce belief. This creates a powerful cycle. Positive self-talk leads to better action. Better action leads to improved outcomes. And those outcomes strengthen confidence. The person no longer relies on external validation because their progress becomes visible and measurable. Confidence is no longer a hope, it becomes evidence-based. Destiny is not determined by dramatic moments, but by repeated behavior. A person's future is shaped quietly through daily routines, consistent effort, and disciplined choices. These behaviors are guided internally long before they appear externally. The language used in moments of fatigue, pressure, or failure often determines whether progress continues or stops. When self-talk remains strong during difficult moments, momentum is preserved. Instead of quitting, the individual adjusts. Instead of blaming, they take responsibility. This mindset transforms obstacles into training grounds rather than stopping points. Over time, resilience develops, and resilience is one of the strongest predictors of long-term success. Ultimately, the words spoken to oneself become a personal compass. They influence direction more than circumstances, luck, or talent. When individuals learn to guide themselves with constructive language, they gain control over their actions. And when actions are aligned consistently with growth and discipline, the future unfolds as a natural result of intentional living, not chance. Sustained personal growth requires more than understanding what to do. It requires maintaining momentum long after initial enthusiasm fades. Many people begin self-improvement with excitement, only to abandon it when progress feels slow or challenges arise. This is where disciplined self-talk becomes essential. The words a person speaks to themselves during ordinary days determine whether growth becomes temporary or permanent. Daily life is filled with moments that test commitment, fatigue, distraction, boredom, and setbacks. In these moments, external motivation is rarely available. What remains is the internal voice. If that voice is weak, progress stalls. If it is firm and encouraging, progress continues. Effective self-talk during these moments does not rely on excitement. It relies on responsibility. It reminds the individual why they started and what is required to continue. Personal growth is often uncomfortable because it demands change. The mind naturally resists discomfort and seeks familiarity, even if that familiarity produces poor results. Intentional self-talk helps override this resistance by consistently reminding oneself that discomfort is a sign of growth rather than failure. The individual learns to tolerate short-term struggle for long-term improvement. This mental reframing allows progress to continue even when results are not immediately visible. Consistency is built through repetition of both action and instruction. When a person repeatedly tells themselves to stay focused, to complete tasks, and to act with discipline, they reinforce a standard. Over time, this standard becomes part of their identity. They no longer see discipline as something they try to practice, they see it as something they do. Identity-based change is far more durable than motivation-based change. Another critical aspect of sustained growth is self-correction without self-criticism. Mistakes are inevitable, but harsh self-talk often leads to discouragement rather than improvement. Constructive self-talk allows individuals to acknowledge errors while staying forward focused. Instead of saying, "I failed," they say, "I learned," adjust, and continue. This approach preserves momentum and keeps effort aligned with progress. As days and weeks pass, the compounding effect of consistent self-talk becomes evident. Small improvements in focus, discipline, and emotional control accumulate. The individual begins to trust themselves more because they have evidence of follow-through. This trust strengthens commitment, making future challenges easier to face. In the long term, growth is not sustained by intensity, but by structure. Intentional self-talk provides that structure internally. It becomes the steady guide that keeps effort aligned, standards high, and direction clear. Through consistent inner guidance, personal development evolves from a temporary phase into a lifelong practice, ensuring that progress does not stop when circumstances become difficult. In the end, meaningful change begins and ends with self-leadership, and self-leadership is rooted in the way a person speaks to themselves. Thoughts shape words. Words guide actions, and actions repeated daily define direction. When self-talk is careless, life becomes reactive and inconsistent. When self-talk is intentional, disciplined, and constructive, life gains clarity and purpose. The practice of conscious self-talk over time reshapes identity. By choosing words that encourage responsibility, focus, and growth, individuals train their minds to respond with resilience instead of resistance. Progress no longer depends on mood or motivation, but on standards reinforced through repetition. This shift transforms self-improvement from a temporary effort into a sustainable way of living. What may begin as a deliberate exercise gradually becomes a natural habit. As internal language improves, decisions become wiser, actions more consistent, and confidence more stable. Challenges remain, but they no longer dictate behavior. The individual learns to move forward with discipline, even in uncertainty. Ultimately, the way a person speaks to themselves determines how they act, how they persist, and where they end up. When self-talk is aligned with purpose and consistency, growth becomes inevitable. Over time, this intentional inner dialogue creates not only better results, but a stronger, more directed life built on clarity, responsibility, and continual improvement.